Thank you very much. This is my first time in London, and I'm loving it. I think I might even like it more than the United States. I have to be honest with you. Like others, I'm always battling with my weight. But when I weighed myself last night in Los Angeles, I was just short 400 pounds. That's a big number. But when I got to my hotel room here, I stepped on the scale, and all I weighed was 28 stone. Honestly, I shouldn't joke about it, because I was recently at the doctor. He checked me out and he said, "Mr. Rechnitz, it's time for change. You're a ticking time bomb. You're overweight, you don't do any exercise, and I hear that you lie on your couch all day. I don't mean to scare you, but you're not getting any younger." I immediately went home and I relayed to my wife what the doctor said. "He pretty much thinks that I'm a ticking time bomb," I told her. "But the craziness ends here. It changes now. I desperately need to find myself another doctor." It's so exhilarating to be here tonight. Besides meeting all the wonderful people, it almost feels like it's a reunion, way back from when I learned in yeshiva. I even met my first chavrus in Mir ever. Someone set us up. I remember we learned for about 20 minutes, and he said he had to go to the bathroom. And I hadn't seen him since. I gave him a hug and I said, "Moshe, are you feeling any better?" But there's one advantage to being very large, especially since I've heard that London recently experienced some anti-Semitic activity. I'm reminded of a story that occurred a few years ago with me and my twin brother. I guess for those of you who don't know, I have an identical twin brother who is practically a carbon copy of me. As a matter of fact, you'll never know if he's really the one speaking here tonight, and I'm in Los Angeles relaxing at home. Anyway, we were sitting in the car in the street outside the front of his house discussing some business. A traveling car pulled up behind us, waiting for us to get out of the way. As it was a quiet street, we mentioned for them to go around us. They didn't seem to agree with that idea and began hooting. Again, my brother put his arm out the window and motioned for them to simply drive around us. So you can't really imagine it here because the steering wheel, your cars are built incorrectly. From what I understand, you get the cars that the Americans messed up on. The hooting continued. Finally, they proceeded to pull around us and stop right by our side. Predictably, the profanity started being exchanged back and forth. It wasn't exactly what you think. They had mouths like sailors, and it was literally disgusting to listen to them. While we, on the other hand, were calling them words like silly face or banana brain. Eventually, they decided they were going to show us who's boss, and they got out of their car and approached us, obviously looking to start a fight. My brother and I got out of the car and walked directly to within an inch of them. The guys maybe reached here. And we're clearly thinking, what were the chances that we picked these two guys in all of Los Angeles to start up with? We put up angry faces, and they were clearly very nervous. One of the guys looked up at my brother, and in a trembling voice he said, "We're Jewish too." I have to tell you, at that point, they would have exchanged their fancy, fast car with one of those cardboard yarmulkes they give out at the Kaisel. I was thinking maybe we should go into Kiev or something. Bereshus, the Mir Rosh Yeshiva Shlita, the Mir Rosh Yeshiva, Umaronan Rabbanon Chavirosa Kadishasa, Loimdei Torah V'Tem Chel. I was invited by numerous maestros in England to come and speak about the problem of children getting into school. Firstly, to be honest, I'm not the authority on this, but because the problem exists here as well, I'd like to tell you a Maisa Shahaya that I recently heard from a Sanz Chassid who heard it directly from the Sanz Kleisenberger Rebbe. The story occurred with the Friedeke Sanz Kleisenberger Rebbe, who we know Lo Aleinu lost all his children in the Holocaust. He eventually settled in Eretz Yisrael. He was once approached by two parties. One party was the principal of a local cheder who was determined for various reasons not to accept a child into his meisid. On the other side were nervous parents who pled to the Rebbe that there's no other cheder in the area that would rightfully impart to him our Torah and our Messiah. The Rebbe looked up at the principal with the most serious face and asked in a loud voice, "Do you want to take the place in Gehenna of Trotsky's Rebbe?" The principal was dumbfounded. What Trotsky? Who Trotsky? The Rebbe was referring to a young boy named Leigh Bronstein from Odessa, who at the tender age of 8 was expelled from the local cheder. I Googled it, by the way, and this, even the Goyish sites talk about this. What the boy did wrong, I can't tell you. I know there were no smartphones in the late 1800s, no televisions, not even iPads. Perhaps it was due to the employment of his father, David Bronstein, who was a mere farmer. This boy, who eventually changed his name to Leon Trotsky, led the Red Army in Russia for over 20 years. During his tenure, he murdered, Rachmana litzlan, millions of Yidden. Anoshim mitaf. He was eventually assassinated, but unfortunately only after he had committed these terrible atrocities. The Kleisenberger Rebbe did not ask if the principal standing in front of him wanted to take Trotsky's place in Gehenna. That would have been a halbitzer. What he did ask was, do you want to take the place of Trotsky's Rebbe? The Rebbe who made the decision that this young boy didn't deserve to be in the yeshiva. The Rebbe who decided that this boy should be someone else's problem. I could tell you in the Rebbe's defense, if there really is any defense, that how could the Rebbe have possibly anticipated the massive carnage of just one single boy not having yeshiva in which to learn. A few short years ago, a delegation of Rabbanim came to my home. They flew all the way to the West Coast, from the East Coast, to explain to me a different way of viewing this shiloh that unfortunately comes up all too often. I have to be honest with you that prior to that meeting, I really did not look at it from their angle. They explained to me that clearly their actions are not caused by a lack of Avas Yisrael. Rather, it was situational. Imagine, they said, if a person is Torasei Umnasei, having dedicated himself to a life of learning, came Chayenu v'Yirchameinu, and his innocent child goes down the street to play with his friend, his classmate, who has a home way more materialistic than his own, who has the latest toys and gadgets that this boy could only dream of. His friend's father is a respectable Yid who leads a Torah household and is kiveyayitim every day. Yet that doesn't take away from the fact that they have a new basketball court, which makes the innocent child beyond impressed, maybe even a little jealous. After a few hours, the boy then goes back to his own apartment, whose floors and walls have seen better days. He guesstimates that 3 of his apartments can fit into his friend's house. His whole toy collection consists of a coloring book that he received a few years ago as a Hanukkah gift. Can we expect this boy not to immediately decide that when he gets older he would much prefer to follow in the footsteps of his friend's family rather than his own? Why should the parents who are in Klei Kodesh now be obligated to try to sell their child on deeper insights of what they've decided of how they decided to live their life? How do they explain to a young boy the concept of Pas B'Melach Toichal, when this issue should have and could have been avoided? Why should they be left with a challenge that really didn't have to come up in the first place? Again, I have to admit that I never did particularly consider it from that point of view. The Gemara at the end of Sukkah quotes a memra from the Amir known as Abaya. Shusa dianuka bishuka, the talk or the words of a child in the street, oyi davua, oyi diime, come from either his father or for his mother. And I was always puzzled. First, logistically, Abaya never even had a father, Rahman al-Itzlan. He was nifter while Abaya was being taught Kol HaTorah Kula by a malach for 9 straight months. The tragedy was compounded when his mother, Leolenu, passed away during his birth. He lived with a foster mother who he passionately adored and would often quote her in different places in the Gemara. But more importantly, how can Abaya make such a generalization that the talk of a child came from his parents and not from his friends? We're clearly not talking about an infant, as this child is walking in the street. He probably spends a lot more time with his chaverim in cheder than he does at home. How is Abaya so sure that this boy's views did not come from one or more of his chaverim? I think the pshat is that Abaya clearly didn't know. What he was saying and explaining was something else entirely. We send our children to yeshiva to learn Torah, but their overall hashkafa, their overall view on life, their overall understanding of how things should work, on what's right and what's wrong, that comes from their home. Not what they're told at home, but what they see. It's what they see at home. It's very possible that a child heard something negative from one of his classmates, but whether or not he's makabel it, whether or not he knows it as a truth, whether or not he'll be influenced, that comes from his home. You see, children have the innate ability to see through us. They know what we truly believe and what we really, in fact, hold dear. Shusa dianuka bishuka, the speaking of a child in the marketplace, oida avua, oida ime, are ultimately the responsibility of his own parents. Yes, there comes a time when we have to stop blaming the school, the Rebbe, his friends, and start taking the responsibility of our children on ourselves. No, I don't know all the answers, but this is where we have to follow our Gedolim v'asisas k'chol asher yerucha. On the subject of Yenuka, of children, I was reminded of a very interesting series of events as the Gemara relays in Bava Metzia and other Masechtas. We're all familiar with the duo of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Like Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, like Abaya and Rava, while their derech halimud may have differed, it was always besimcha l'shem Torah. The Gemara gives us insight into the beginnings of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish's relationship. Reish Lakish was a man of incredible physical strength, which led him to a career as a leader of a band of robbers and thieves. One day he saw Rabbi Yochanan swimming in the Yarden. He vault-jumped into the river as he thought this was a woman. Rabbi Yochanan, upon seeing Reish Lakish's massive strength, said to him, "Your strength should be utilized for Torah." To which Reish Lakish responded, "Your beauty should be used for women." Rabbi Yochanan, seeing what was important to Reish Lakish, offered him a deal. If you turn around, do tshuva, and dedicate your life to Torah, I will in turn give you my sister, who is more beautiful than I, for marriage. V'kach hoya. Reish Lakish spent days and nights immersed in learning. Predictably, he grew to heights where he eventually changed from Rabbi Yochanan's Talmud to Rabbi Yochanan's Chavrusa. The Gemara relates an event that unfortunately made Rabbi Yochanan believe for the moment that Reish Lakish was not makir tov to him for turning his life around. Despite the pleas of Reish Lakish's wife, the sister of Rabbi Yochanan took a kpeda on what he said to him, which resulted in the untimely death of the young Reish Lakish shortly thereafter. When Reish Lakish died, Rabbi Yochanan was inconsolable. The Chachamim tried to replace Rabbi Lakish and instructed Rav Elazar ben Pidas to go learn with Rabbi Yochanan. But every time Rabbi Yochanan would say a chiddush, Rav Elazar would bring rayas, proofs, for what he had just said. However, this further aggravated Rabbi Yochanan, as he remembered Reish Lakish always challenging him with 24 questions. The inherent challenge in those questions would bring about the inevitable expanse of the discussion. Memela Rafsa Shmaitza. Rabbi Yochanan would then be forced to give Reish Lakish 24 answers and bring about increased clarity to the subject. Now that Reish Lakish was no longer there, that dynamic was sorely lacking. In fact, Rabbi Yochanan roamed the streets wailing, Heicha ad bar Lakisha, Heicha ad bar Lakisha. Where are you, Reish Lakish? Where are you, Reish Lakish? The situation deteriorated and Rabbi Yochanan remained so grief-stricken that Yotzami Daitei, he completely lost his mind. Having no other eitzah, the Chachamim davened for Rabbi Yochanan to leave this world to avoid more pain. The Eibishter in his Midas Harachmim quickly brought Rabbi Yochanan back to the Yeshiva Shel Malo. As lahavdil an addiction, Rabbi Yochanan needed the Torah and the thought process of a Reish Lakish. Then one day in the Gemara in Tainis brings Rabbi Yochanan went looking for Reish Lakish's son, and he found him. Ashkechei Rabbi Yochanan liyenuka d'Reish Lakish. He said to Reish Lakish's son, Eima li psukech, tell me what pasuk are you currently learning? The child replied by quoting the pasuk with a double lashon of aser to aser. Rabbi Yochanan explained to him his chiddush of why the word aser is repeated and how he learned from there aser bishvil shetis asher. Give meiser, give tzedakah, so you'll then ultimately become wealthy. The boy then asked Rabbi Yochanan, how did you come to this conclusion? Rabbi Yochanan replied, go test it out for yourself. Reish Lakish's child then asked a very logical question. Is it permissible to test Hashem? Isn't there another pasuk which clearly says, Lo yisenasu es Hashem, you shall not test Hashem? Rabbi Yochanan explained to him that the exception, the only instance in the Torah in which we are allowed to test Hashem is in regards to Meiser Tzedakah, as it says in the Nevuah in Malachi, Uvechanuni na bezois. The Eibishter said to his beloved nation, please test me on this. Im lo eftach es arubes hashamayim, if I don't open the windows of heaven, varikoisi lochem brocha ad blidai. I will shower you with brocha and shefa until you can take no more. Whereas the Gemara in Yerushalayim quotes, Dayenu bracha, Dayenu bracha. With no disrespect intended, as I stand here practically alone with my 1,000 closest friends, let's be honest. We've all seen this pasuk. We've all heard it in speeches. Most of us have even tried it. Yet while some people fare a little better in business than others, how many of us can really say that they were zeichet varikoisi lochem brocha ad blidai? Most times when the Torah mentions schar, reward for a particular mitzvah, it can be defined as the reward eventually coming in Olam Haba, the more important of the two worlds. But that's clearly not the case here, because neither I nor anyone else will have a need for money in Olam Haba. You probably can't smear someone to get into Gan Eden. I need the money here and now where it has value. So what's really going on? Why are we putting Hashem in a position of a person kaviyachol who doesn't keep his word? Quite a few years ago on a trip to Eretz Yisrael, I was given the opportunity to meet Reb Michal Yehuda Lefkowitz, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, Reb Chaim Kanievsky, Shlita, and Reb Aaron Leib Shlita should have a refuah shalema. And to all of them I posed the same question. What shmira is there? What protections are there for an usher not to lose his money? And don't tell me tzedakah, because we've all seen so many people who are big bali tzedakah, yet they lost all their money. All three gedolim each gave me two answers. The common denominator was because of people who are not makbid on ribbis, lending or borrowing money from your fellow Jew with interest. Reb Aaron Leib gave a second answer. He also attributed it to quote-unquote gnevische shtick. Well, I was just told by Reb Matke Greenblatt, this is not part of my Grunwald, this wasn't part of my speech, but that Reb Aaron Leib needs a Yeshua. I'll mention also something when I was there and I asked him something, he answered me. After I finished asking him the question, and he told me ribbis and gnevische shtick, his gabbai felt maybe he can also ask a sharp question. So his gabbai asked about Yenim, Pliny ben Pliny, that Reb Aaron Leib knew, who definitely never took ribbis and definitely never dealt in gnevische shtick. Why did Seif Yamav, he lost all his money? Before the Gabbai finished the question, Rabbi Leib answered, the Gzeira was for him to have money, not his children. It's almost like Rabbi Aaron Leib had this question, he had read it durch. He had to make sure that what the bracha of Harikois Yilochem Dai works. Reb Chaim Kanievsky's second answer was that even when we have money, Medaf Alamol Mispal Zayin, we have to continue to always daven for it. Unfortunately, I forgot the second answer that Reb Michal Yehuda gave me. But at the end of the day, will just any Aveira nullify Hashem's promise? We wouldn't have the audacity to say to the Yerushalayim that we don't sin. Rather, we and our ancestors have at times both lost the battle with our Yetzer Hara. We're human. We're not perfect. While we may always have good intentions, we sometimes slip. Hashem is not just throwing out a teaser. Furthermore, years later, when learning the Sefer HaChinuch on the mitzvah of Aser to Aser, the chinuch was clear. Lo ya'akiv shum ovoin, lo ya'akiv shum dvar ovoin v'chet. That no aveira can stop, can nullify, can negate the money that Hashem promised you, the money that you get by Aser b'shil shetis Aser u'v'chanuni no b'zois. So as the cliche goes, at least in America, show me the money. Yes, show me the money that Hashem promised me. While speaking with the Gedolim, I gave them what I thought may be a shmira. They all agreed with me, but with a sense of that goes without saying. That's obviously a given. Not that I needed this Maisa to show me, but clearly I was way, way behind them. So to everyone who took out the time tonight, Lahagdil Teru Ladira, I'm going to give you the secret to Ashiris, to wealth. Some people say, I just have a little mazel, but they're wrong. I actually figured out a sure way to continually make money. In Eretz Hashem, the Yerushalayim should continue to bring shefa and bracha to me and my family. I gave them a mashal of an usher who has a gabbai tzedakah. The usher gives specific instructions as to how the gabbai is to disperse the money. I want you to give $1,000 to every yeshiva. A koil should get $2,000. Hachnosis kal should get $1,800, etc., etc., etc. The first person walks into the gabbai asks him his name, and then asks, "You're the yeshiva that didn't take my son in, correct?" The fundraiser doesn't know what to do and leaves empty-handed. Another person comes in, he's dressed as a Chassidish Yid. "Oh, your Rebbe and my Rebbe don't get along because your Rebbe insulted my Rebbe." He too turns around and leaves empty-handed. A third person comes in and is criticized for not sitting the gabbai's father on the dais at his Moised's last annual dinner. I guess an usher should be pretty happy as he saved the money that he ordinarily would have given. But it doesn't work that way. Once the usher does find out, he'll drop everything he's doing, he'll run to the gabbai's house and say, "Who do you think you are? Are you crazy? You're going to give or not give my money based on your personal reasons?" The first thing that any usher would do, the first thing that anyone in this room would do, is take back the checkbook. The nimshal is obvious. We have to realize that we are mir gizbayrim. We are all gabei tzedakah with the Eibishter's money. Yet unfortunately, most or all people have at least one ma'aser or cause that they will absolutely not support. Because you don't like a certain Rosh Koil, or your minhagim differ entirely from another person's exact Messiah, that doesn't mean that the 500 Yungalite or any other need of Hashem's own children should be on the other end of your quote-unquote shita or punishment. To those people I say, beware of the Eibishter. The balabas with a capital B will no doubt demand that you return the checkbook. Disclaimer, as most speakers, I'll never boast about my own attributes when speaking publicly, especially since there aren't many of them to boast about. But this is strictly l'toivus hatzibur and l'toivus mir yeshiva. I can say that I have many, many faults. You can ask around. There's absolutely no shortage there. But what I like to call selective giving is not one of them. I do not pick and choose. I always give and have always given. For as far back as I can remember, I never, ever said no to someone. I might not have given them what they wanted or what they expected or according to their desired time frame, but I never said no. And believe me, there are people who have hurled insults at me or at someone in my family who are living, and family who have already passed. Yes, sometimes I had to hold my nose and force myself to smile, let alone write a check. But I never forgot that I wasn't giving out my own money. You want the Eibishter to come through on his promise of varikoisi lochem brocha ad b'lidai, which I remind you the Sefer HaChinuch says cannot be nullified even if we do averes. If you want to be zoicha to the Oisher and Arubeis HaShamayim, before we even start, we have to realize something that's so clear. As I said, it's a given. And if you don't get wealthy despite the promise of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not because of an aver that you did. It's probably not even aver to withhold tzedakah to an organization with whom you just can't see eye to eye. As long as you're giving your meiser, I presume. The reason the Eibishter's promise was not niskayim is because you just didn't realize and treat whose money this really was. And let me add, we say every day in davening, v'hoser satan milfaneinu umeachareinu. We ask Hashem to remove the satan from in front of us and from in back of us. And I always wondered, I understand the Eibishter and asking the Eibishter to move the satan away, the satan who stands before us attempting nonstop to hold us back from doing a mitzvah. But what does v'hoser satan me'achareinu mean? Which satan is behind us? I'm convinced that the pshat is that when a person does a mitzvah, such as a person writes a check for tzedakah, but later regrets it, shouldn't have given them that much. They didn't really need the money that bad. That, Rabbi Yisai, is not doing a mitzvah b'shleimusa. The hoser satan u'faneinu, take away the satan who stands before us, telling us not to do the mitzvah. U'me'achareinu, and the satan who lingers behind and convinces you to regret the mitzvah that you already mekayim. I'm reminded of the late, renowned Mr. Bernard Hochstein, who I had the zechus as a bacher to meet with several times after he settled in Eretz Yisrael in his senior years. I could just watch him for hours. A businessman by trade and an enormous Baal Tzedakah. His foundation till today gives out millions a year. He amassed a tremendous fortune. He was someone who would never link financial with success. He viewed money as a tool, not as an end unto itself. He lived his life convinced that giving tzedakah was his best and most profitable investment. My cousin, Rabbi Yehuda Fuss, was his grandson. Rabbi Yehuda would look forward every year to Parashas Re'eh, when he would accompany his grandfather to shul. After laning aser to aser, Mr. Hochstein would stand up, give a klap, and with the utmost joy explain with fervor and passion. But before he finished his short discourse, he would guarantee that everyone in the shul a 10 times return on any tzedakah they gave that week, ending off by telling anyone who didn't receive that return could come to him and he would personally make them whole. I'd like to tell you something I'm noticing. In the last few years in the United States, people, and especially from the younger generation, are giving unprecedented amounts to the biggest Makom Torah in the world. And there's no question that we're constantly seeing these younger people, these former yeshivalites, who we all have to admit are not the most highly educated in limudei chayil, experiencing remarkable and unusual shefa and bracha as their contributions to the yeshiva increase every year. So you can do two things tonight. You can leave, go home, call it a night. On behalf of everyone, I thank you for coming. Or you can take out a check, tell the Eibishter that on this mitzvah and only on this mitzvah, you're allowed to test him. Write the amount as though you were writing it as an investment. Jot down the words of Chanuni na bezos on the memo line. And with a sincere smile, hand the check or tell your pledge to anyone here working for the Mir Yeshiva. But remember, never to regret it, ever. The Lashon of the Torah and the Beis Yosef both say that this is Bodik Umenusa. They've seen it. It happens all the time. I hope I'm not boring you, but I've spoken tonight about two issues. The crisis of children in schools, and then, with the help of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, the inyan of tzedakah. But if you really think about it, just a tad beyond the surface, you'll realize that they're both the same idea. They both come from the same reasoning, which is the understanding that a person was not put on this world just to enjoy life and live for nobody else but himself. There's a musig of a kehila, a communal setting. In a kehila, everyone is responsible to partake and support the needs of that kehila. Whether that means giving tzedakah and supporting all the necessary meisnis and organizations, but it also includes being achroi for every child who is in need of a school. They're both the same responsibility. Reish Lakish just had to understand aser b'shvil shetis asher in the inyan of tzedakah, of helping out the needy, to be able to say in Masechtas Shabbos, Omar Reish Lakish, Kol ir shein batinoikos shel beis rabban machriven oisai. Any city that does not have schools for their children has to be destroyed. I remember when speaking about this prior, I brought down a ritva also that specifically says that you have to open up a school if there's one child in the city. The Gemara in Baba Basra says, Bram zocher oisay ish latoiv Yeshua ben Gamla shmai. This person will always be remembered for good. Shel molei hu nishtach chatoyer mi Yisrael. If not for him, Torah would have been forgotten from Klal Yisrael. And the Gemara goes on to explain that until Ben Gamla, a person's father would teach him Torah. But unfortunately, there was nothing in place for the children who didn't have fathers, the assignment. So Yeshua ben Gamla made a takana that every city and every village must open up a cheder. And the question arises, what Yeshua ben Gamla did was indeed very admirable, but realistically, most people had fathers. So how can the Gemara possibly say that without him, nishtach Torah Yisrael? The majority of the children were learning. And as a side note, nishtach Torah Yisrael is a pretty serious threat. The world is built on Torah. Is there any other Gemara in Shas that even considers this a possibility? I'm sure there are many terutzim to this kasha. There are Chassidische terutzim, Litvische terutzim, Brisker terutzim, Svardische terutzim. And while I can't tell you which teretz is accurate, one thing the Gemara definitely makes clear is that if even one child doesn't have a school, the result will be nishtach Torah Yisrael, because we never know, especially with our tumultuous history, who will be the one who is able to transmit Torah to the next generation. Reish Lakish, who started out as the common thief, displayed the seriousness of this inyan to the point that if a city does not have a school, the city needs to be destroyed. Poor Rav Yochanan forever sought to replace his chavrusa. It's obvious how much they learned together by observing all the machloksim and shas between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish. But on one thing in shas, and only one thing only, they agreed. In Masechtas Tamura, Yudalit Amid Beis, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish agreed. Mutav ti'aker Torah, better not to do a mitzvah, better to be over an aveira. Val tishtachech Torah mi Yisrael, to be sure that Torah is never forgotten from the Yidden. I was always under the impression that you can only be over a mitzvah or an aveira if there's a risk of pikuach nefesh. The Torah, when mentioning mitzvahs and aveiros in general, writes v'chai bohem, that sans the three aveiros chamuris, where the din is yaharg val yavar, the Torah doesn't expect one to risk his life. So we come full circle back to Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, who are clear that the one time that we could be over a mitzvah or an aveira is in a case where there is no pikuach nefesh, is if there's a mere chance of nishtach Torah Yisrael. Remember Yeshua ben Gamla for the good, for without him assuring that every single child had a school, we could have all chas v'sholom forgotten the Torah. Comes Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish to tell us that it's better to uproot and disrupt an entire city while being over on mitzvahs and aveiros to assure shelo nishtachech Torah mi Yisrael. Or perhaps they're not telling us a chiddush. We just never realized that one child not in school is pikuach nefesh. Leon Trotsky's Rebbe surely had missed this Gemara. I'm here tonight to represent the Mir Yeshiva, the largest yeshiva in the world. I learned in Mir Yeshiva for over 6 years. You live in a cocoon of Torah. Recently, as I had composed a song to the words of Kadyas von Yisrael, v'askin b'simlas HaTorah, I tried to find the origin of the words, and I couldn't find them. They were nowhere. I asked people, I Googled it, I checked in the Yisra Chachma, and I came up with nothing. I could not for the life of me find those holy words. But while I didn't see the words, I did one better. I actually saw the man who would tremble and shake uncontrollably just to give over a shear. His smile, his love for his Talmidim never left his face. Unfortunately, at times we see too many people with tsaras. Some of them are able to sit and learn and temporarily forget their tsar. But to see Agoyin HaKadosh Reb Nosson Tzvi Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha immersed in learning with every last fiber of strength gave me a new meaning to the words. D'ashtechan b'tzara delhoyin v'askin b'chedva sodeli. The Eibishter said to his closest malachim, look at my beloved children that continuously suffer without a break, but yet they learn and harv in my delight, in my Torah. The Talmidim who sit today in Mir Yeshiva are representatives and the representation of Torah in this world. Mir Talmidim dot the globe from London to Los Angeles, from Pennsylvania to Panama, Atlanta to Antwerp, and of course all around Yerushalayim HaKodesh. These 8,000 plus Talmidim learn Torah, that's all they do. I recently came across a very disturbing statistic. 60% of the children in Kiryat Sefer, a Haredi city and home to Yeshivas Mir Brachfeld, are malnourished. At first I said, it's ridiculous, it can't be. But I checked it out, and it's true. Malnourishment doesn't mean starving. It doesn't mean that they have to be a black kid and have 14 flies buzzing around their face. It means that they don't eat properly, that they eat pasta all week long. They don't get essential vitamins and minerals to assure critical, healthy growth. Anything just to fill them up because they can't afford more. Rabbi Isai, the Torah world cannot be malnourished. That's a zilzul of Talmidei Chachamim and a shrek l'chachil Hashem. In today's world where there is so much parnasa, where there's so much shefa and bracha, we can't at the very least ensure that their children, that our children, have enough to eat? What are we thinking? What ridiculous excuse is getting us through the day? So me, left the fundraising job up to the sickly Reb Nosson Tzvi. And it no doubt took the worst feasible toll possible. Heicha ata Reb Nosson Tzvi. Heicha ata Reb Nosson Tzvi. Starting today, we can do better, and we must. Nothing less than the covet of the Eibishter is at stake. I witnessed something else a few months ago. At first, the sight warmed my heart, but then it pained me greatly. I saw Jungelites standing in line in order to receive heavily discounted bread for their families. At first, I thought, how nice. But then the thought struck me. What's zilzul Talmidei Chachamim? Why must the ambassadors of Torah stand in line to get a loaf of bread for 2 shekel? Of course, it's a wonderful gesture on the part of those who are providing for these families. But at the same time, it's unacceptable for those who can change the status quo. If we have the ability and means to make a difference, we must. As Mir is the largest yeshiva in the world, everybody looks to us to see how a bacher, how a kohen gaman is treated. We must do it for the Mir, for all of Torah, for the Eibishter. Let's start the 3rd century of Mir, where they have our complete support. Yes, Mir, where the Rosh Yeshiva and the Talmidim didn't stop hovering and learning as they were forced from city to city and from country to country. Today's Talmidim are being built on 200 years of Leipuska Yeshiva. I conclude with a story about Rav Meir Shapiro. When Rav Meir founded Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin on the premise that B'nai Torah must be treated like royalty, his position was met with strong opposition. The novel idea rubbed some the wrong way. They were of the school of thought that followed the literal meaning of the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Kach hi darcha shel Torah, pas b'melech toichal, u'mayim b'mesura tishte. This is the way of the Torah. Eat bread with salt, drink water in small measures. According to their viewpoint, Torah is acquired through a life of deprivation. Rav Meir responded with a thought from the Baal Shem Tov and said to those who opposed his views, "You're reading the Mishnah incorrectly. It's not a statement, but it was written as a question in the Lashon Tamiyah, in the language of astonishment, of wonder. Kach hi darka shel Torah? Is this the manner of Torah? Pas b'melech toichal? Should one sustain himself with only bread and salt? Is that really it?" Rabbi say we can't allow the Talmidei Chachamim, the younger light, the Bachrim of Mir Yeshiva to fall. Because if the Mir suffers, then the Torah world suffers with it. And that, Rabbi say, cannot happen. I'm sure over the years, you've heard a lot of speeches, a lot of appeals. But what I'm telling you is badik umenusa. What I'm telling you works every time. Everyone needs to write a check, whether you wrote one before or not. And if you want to know the amount of the check, it's a simple calculation. Whatever number you want 10 times of, that's what you should write. Thank you for listening.